Look, I know this game has been out for about 5 days now, or however long, depending on how you're watching this, when you're watching it. But I really wanted to get this game and make a review. I was just too carried away by Rage 2, which I'm not done playing yet. But here it is. Castlevania Anniversary Collection is kind of the collection we've been asking for quite a while. Sure, we got Castlevania Requiem on the PS4, but that only gave us 2 games, though albeit the 2 best games in the entire series. However, you cannot overlook this game, this collection, and of course the anniversary of Castlevania definitely deserves to be celebrated, even if Konami has been flushing it down the toilet as of late. So, what's up guys, it's DPX. Welcome to my Castlevania Anniversary Collection review. Since I forgot to put the sound from the games playing, you'll just have to hear the music whenever you see a segment transition. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe if you're new, leave a comment, and turn on the notifications bell. Messed that up a bit. But you'll be a loyal subscriber either way. Instead of starting with the usual core gameplay as I do in most of my game reviews, I'd actually start with the games. And to be honest, that's going to be pretty much the whole review. This collection has 10 games on it. We'll briefly talk about every single one of them, and we'll even give them a review score of their own, and combine them to make the final version. So, this review will be a bit different, as we're only going to be talking about these games. There is a little bit more than the games, but we'll briefly talk about that too. Starting with the first Castlevania, of course. This game is iconic, but looking at it now, it's definitely not the best one. That's not to say it's bad or it hasn't held up well, because it succeeds with both of those. It was a great start to an iconic franchise, however, it is hard. And I mean bullshit hard. I'd even go as far as to saying it's one of the hardest games ever made and the hardest Castlevania game ever made. And the franchise did get some really tough games down the line. The original Castlevania gets an 8 out of 10. It doesn't remain the best game in the series today, but it definitely remains the hardest. Next up is the sequel, Simon's Quest. I'm sure Angry Video Game Nerd has already told you how much this game sucks, but it's not as bad. Even James Rolfe himself, who plays Angry Video Game Nerd, admitted that it's just a character. However, I wouldn't really call it that good either. The music and the sprite work are great, but the game is so cryptic that it honestly puts a huge damper on the whole thing. Also, the day-to-night transitions are annoying and do sort of interrupt the gameplay. There are also times where you'll just be walking with nothing happening, just trying to progress the game. No enemies coming at you or anything. In the end, though not terrible, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, isn't really that good either, but would have felt wrong without this game on this collection. So, I give Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest a 6 out of 10. Keep in mind that a 6 is just above average, and that's what this game is. Just above average. Next is Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. Out of all the original NES Castlevania games, 3 is definitely my favorite. Unlike the first 2, in 3, you actually play as Trevor Belmont rather than Simon Belmont, who is an ancestor to Simon, making this a prequel. The cryptic annoyances are gone, and the day-to-night transition are no longer an issue. The score is great, which will be a running thing with this whole collection. The only complaint I have for this game is that it can get difficult at times, and even then, not on the same level as the first one. I give Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse a 9.5 out of 10. Definitely the best game in the original 8-bit Castlevania's trilogy, and definitely the best game in this collection so far. Now we jump to the Super Nintendo with Super Castlevania 4. I wonder where Super Castlevania 1, 2, and 3 went. Super. Who cares? The word super is absolutely deserved for this fantastic game. This is basically all the NES games combined into one, and better. It's almost a remake in terms of story. This also allowed you to use your whip in multiple directions, which was a series first. Not to mention, the music is some of the best in the entire series, which says a lot, of course. It's very smooth and is absolutely a blast to play. Super Castlevania 4 gets a 10 out of 10. Yep, totally is super in every way. Now we go to Castlevania The Adventure on the Game Boy, which is definitely the first game I have to question. This is probably one of the lamest and, dare I say, worst Castlevania games ever. It's not offensive by any means or anything like that, but it's just not a fun game to play. Whenever you jump, there's this weird stiffness and delay to it, and the hit detection is BS. You can tell they tried with the music, and I give them credit for that, since, you know, it's good for what it is. But in the end, Castlevania The Adventure on Game Boy is a less than stellar installment in the iconic Castlevania franchise, and there were better games they could have put in this game collection. But I digress. However, still, I give Castlevania The Adventure a 5 out of 10. Next up is another Game Boy game. That's being called Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge. And I have to say I gotta question this game too. It's not much better than Castlevania The Adventure. In fact, I'd actually say it's a bit worse. You weirdly go right to left rather than left to right, like in, I don't know, every other video game ever that's a side-scroller. The problems with The Adventure are all present in Belmont's Revenge. So we're just gonna go right to the score and give it also a 5 out of 10. Keep in mind though, the Game Boy games aren't that good, but they still got that Castlevania polish, you know. Simply put, they should just use the rebirth versions. Next up is possibly my favorite game in this collection, and that is Castlevania Bloodlines. Also known as Castlevania The New Generation in other regions, this game was actually on the Sega Genesis, which means it was allowed to have a lot of blood and gore, and so it did. This is also the first time in a Castlevania game where you don't play as the Belmonts. In fact, no sign of the Belmonts at all in this game. Instead, you have a choice between John Morris and Eric Lacard. If you want something closer to the Belmonts, use John Morris, since he's got a whip. But I actually suggest using Eric Lacard as he's got a trident, which does make things a little easier. And it still feels like Castlevania with the trident. Castlevania Bloodlines is just a blast to play, and is honestly one of my favorites in the whole series, maybe even my favorite in this collection. It's a hidden gem though, so yeah, be lucky if you played it. Bloodlines, Castlevania Bloodlines gets a 10 out of 10. Maybe just as super as Super Castlevania 4. Last but absolutely not least is Kid Dracula. This is probably the most shocking game to be on here, as it was only released on the Famicom and not the NES. This is definitely the most different of all these games, as there are no whips, you just shoot things. Like you breathe fireballs. Pretty cool. Also, the fact that it's not called Castlevania also makes it a bit different. It is a Castlevania game though. It's still a hidden gem, and one that definitely deserves to be played now that, you can. Some of the enemies can be very annoying though, that's my main gripe with this game, but it doesn't ruin the game for me. So I give Kid Dracula a 9 out of 10. I did this review differently because there's not a whole lot more to this collection other than the games, but that's okay. There is this bonus book where you can look at artwork that is really cool, so that's a plus for me. So anyways, in conclusion, the Castlevania Anniversary Collection is a stellar collection of Castlevania games. Again, with the questionable Game Boy games, and with the Castlevania 2, although it should definitely be on here, is definitely not the greatest game, but it does show the legacy of Castlevania, so it should be on here. It should be on. But the Game Boy games, you can just choose not to play them. The only issue with that is they shouldn't be there, and there should be other games like, let's say, Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night, which I understand why they're not on here because of Castlevania Requiem, but you can also have some of the Game Boy Advance for DS games on here, or they could have done the Rebirth version of The Adventure. Anyways, it is what it is, and you can simply just ignore them and you have a perfect collection, which is why I give Castlevania Anniversary Collection a 9.5 out of 10. I know I just said it would be a perfect collection, but all things considered, with the Game Boy games, does bring it down to a 9.5, but there's no shame. You should definitely pick this up, especially for the price it's at, which is only $20. Well, that was my review for Castlevania Anniversary Collection. What did you think? I just reviewed all the games in there too. What did you think? Did you agree with me at all? I'll show you my ranking on the screen right now, from like what Castlevania games on this collection that I like from the most to the least. Yeah, be sure to like this video, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.